Hello, everybody. My name is Martin Loffers. I'm the Chief Technical Officer. So you see me on the left, and I have with me Beth Morgan, founder and CEO of Boom. Welcome.
Hi, Martijn. Great to be here with you today.
Thanks a lot. This webinar will be recorded. Everybody's on mute, but feel free to ask questions. There are two options to ask questions. You can either do it by chat, and some others can comment. So, basic question is, will we get the presentations? Yes, you will get it as a PDF. And another way is, in the questions area, you see a question mark on the right-hand side of your screen. You can ask questions. During our conversation, we will have a Q&A at the end, but feel free to ask this question right away. And if the question is in line of what we are discussing, I will pick it up and ask this question right away to Beth to get it into our conversation. All right. So first, we're going to start why we do this webinar right now. So the day before yesterday was International Women's Day. And the theme of this year was Let's All Choose to Challenge. So that was the theme of the day before yesterday. You see it here, and maybe you have seen it on LinkedIn or elsewhere. What did we do as Supply Chain Media, also together with Beth? So we did a workshop in a 3D world with 25 female supply chain executives. We're here on the sun deck starting the webinar, or it was a workshop. Then we did some roundtable sessions, so in two sections, one with Lucy Harding of Oxford Burnson, and another one was done by Beth. And, we're sitting here, so here you see all those supply chain women listening to some presentations by Unilever and some others. And you see here on the stage myself as the only male in the audience in the participations of the women, and Beth. And this is what Beth has been doing. So can you explain, Beth, what we see here?
Yeah, perhaps it might be good just to do a quick introduction for those who haven't heard of Boom before. So Boom is a global online community that brings together female supply chain professionals from around the world. And, we come together for connection, for learning, for inspiration, for discussions, and much more. I won't go too much into the detail there, but one of the things that we did for International Women's Day this year was, and many of you, as Martijn said, will probably have seen many photos like this on LinkedIn. Each year, the International Women's Day organisers set out a challenge for us to take a photo, and this year the theme was to raise your hand to challenge and call out stereotypes, gender inequity, bias, and so on. So you'll see these are photos of some of our members from across the community, from around the world, from different companies, different industries, who took up that challenge. Some of them, as you can see, with their daughters, their mothers, and they've accepted this choose to challenge theme for this year, well, and beyond.
Yeah, and we did it ourselves. So we raised our hands as an avatar in our 3D environment. We did on Monday. So that's what we did on Monday as the challenge. But next, what about the female representation in supply chain? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and in fact, hold on, what slide are we going to here?
No, I'm struggling. Yeah.
Here we go. Well, let's start with this. This actually isn't data from Boom. It's actually data from a report that many of you may know already. It's a report that's put out each year since 2016 from Gartner and Awesome, the leadership network in the US, which has tracked over time the representation of females in supply chain. And I think this is probably one of the best records that we have that tracks this this. And for those of you, I'll just sort of walk you through the highlights of what you see on screen here, which is the key data, which looks at various levels. So on the left-hand side, you see the total supply chain workforce and what the split is. So today we're currently, or this was 2020, at 39% of the entire supply chain workforce being female. And then the further right you go on that chart, you can see sort of as you go up through the organizational hierarchy, what that looks like. So starting at, again, that light blue, 31% is at that first line manager level, and then right up to the C-suite on the right-hand side. And, you know, what we can see by looking at this sort of trend over time is that clearly things are changing, which is good. But most of the emphasis and the change you'll see at that top end, 9% representation in the C-suites back in 2016, in 2020, 17%. So a big shift there, obviously with some fluctuations in between. But what we can see, though, before that is that the pipeline is, you know, relatively flat. And we now have a bit of a vacuum, maybe too big a word, but we see that the step before the C-suite has actually taken a drop, you know, there's probably lots of reasons for that, but I think it's important that we track this. And indeed, Gartner currently has their 2021 survey open right now. If you would like to share your company's data anonymously, there's a link on. Yeah, fairly good picture of the state of play today.
Do you see also a drop in the figures because of a maternal leave and that kind of?
You know, we're going to come to this actually as we go through the survey, but I don't think, the presentation today, but I don't think there's one reason for these numbers. You know, that's obviously an obvious thing to look at.
Yep.
But actually, there's lots of other data that suggests that that's not the case. There's lots of other reasons as well. So we'll come to that.
Okay, let's look at your survey and then explain what you have done.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we wanted to do, and in fact, you're sort of in some degree of collaboration with Gartner, what we wanted to do, their survey and report was very much about what the company view is and what companies are doing to address the issue of female representation in supply chain. What we wanted to do as a community of employees of, you know, female supply chain professionals was to say, okay, it's great to see what companies are doing and what that viewpoint is, but what's it actually like as an individual, as an employee? Is what companies doing, are they doing the right things? You know, what is it that actually we need? So we set out to do a sort of a complementary survey, which we fielded in the end of summer, early autumn last year in 2020, which was open to both men and women, looking at issues around career progression in supply chain. And this is just some of the demographic data that you can see here on the screen. So the split, the respondents were largely female, 79%, but they were from, you know, a good spread from a global demographic, again, from an age demographic split, and also from a hierarchical, a seniority split as well. So that's kind of the base of who we polled. And the survey in totality looked at 4 key areas. One was career plans and aspirations. The second was looking at career progression, obstacles and enablers. We also looked at issues around mentoring, sponsorship and leadership development and the role that plays in career progression. And also we looked at equity and inclusion. And we're going to cover just some of that in today's presentation. And in fact, the whole report is available for free download on our website. You don't have to put any names or emails addresses in, just go to our website. I think we're going to share the link at the end. You can download that report and see the whole survey results.
Yeah. The link is free available at the end. How many respondents did you have in this first?
We had, so this was our first one. We had just coming up on 150 responses. Okay. So which, you know, it was our first one. We're going to do another survey this year and hope to grow it as it becomes more well known. But I think, it was fairly representative and actually kind of added some reinforcement of anecdotal data that we'd had from conversations and general research. So a fairly good reflection.
Yeah. Yeah, and the supply chain media will support this next survey.
Absolutely, thank you.
All right. So could you get into the four obstacles to progression?
Yeah, and we've kind of chosen to start out here on this next slide with 4 obstacles. And in fact, let me just set the context, because actually the overall context of the sort of, let's say, the temperature in the supply chain profession when we did this survey last year was actually one that was very optimistic. So, we asked how many people would recommend supply chain as a career, and 84% of respondents said that they'd be likely or very likely to recommend supply chain as a career. Also, the survey did a temperature check on, how ambitious and mobile people saw their career opportunities. And in fact, 69% of respondents said that they were looking to change their jobs in the next 1 to 2 years, either within their own organization or maybe they might move to another one. But nevertheless, they were optimistic and looking forward to career growth. So that's kind of the overall context, which I think is great. However, one of the questions we did ask is, well, okay, that's great, but what are the things that might be holding you back? And the obvious question then is, okay, what can we do about that? And there was a much longer list, but these were the 4 things that came out top of the list. And I think you can see here, so everything on the right and the grey boxes is a big obstacle. So starting at the top, we're looking at lack of transparency into hiring, promotion, decision criteria, visibility or lack of into career progression paths, lack of visibility into specific opportunities. You can see a theme here that, it's not always clear what the opportunities are, either within your own organization or maybe externally as well. But then 4th on this list, and this is, I guess, where, it does play to the topic of diversity and inclusion, is that there is a perceived bias, and this is recognized by both males and females, a bias in the hiring and promotion decision-making process. And that's a big topic in and of itself, and we will dig into that a little bit more as we go through. What's not shown here on the list, which does come out further down, and actually, Martijn, this speaks to what you said earlier in some way, which is actually, we also asked, is the inability to travel due to having family at home, or perhaps having to care for an elder member of the family, or work-life balance, are these things holding you back? And interestingly, they came out relatively low. And it was these things that you see here that were the primarily the obstacles in place.
So I read quite some academic surveys about gender diversity in the last 5 years, also because we wanted to create a gender diversity gap analysis, and we did. And one of the surveys said, if a female executive, wanted to have a job on a C-level, and they didn't get it because 2 male competitors, I would say, one of them was getting it. And if it was not clear to her why she didn't get it, she wouldn't go to another job function again, ever in her life. So that was one of the remarkable studies I've read, and that's something also relating to the 4th point you are mentioning here.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's about, and again, this is part of the solution, is creating this culture and environment where these barriers, if they're not eliminated completely, that would be ideal, but they're much lower, so that all employees are encouraged to feel included. And sometimes there might be very good reasons why somebody got a job and you didn't. But the point is, if you can enable visibility and transparency around the reasons why and make it very clear what the path to that is, then of course that makes it fairer for everybody.
So what are the different company approaches?
Well, I think we're going to dive a bit later into some of the more specific things. But I think here we're kind of shifting gears a little bit and talking about, well, actually, what are companies doing at the highest level? And are they actually, is this issue recognized? And I think it's, it's clear that this largely is an issue that is recognised. But there's some gaps today in terms of whether companies actually have a stated policy with targets and goals around diversity, inclusion, equity, and so on. And those companies that aren't quite there yet. So this slide shows that kind of split, which is actually, it's good news. 61% of our respondents said that their companies did have a stated policy around these issues. A slightly smaller number said, yeah, there's a stated policy, but they haven't actually put any numbers to it, so there's no published targets. And then a much smaller a number of people who said, actually, no, my company's really not doing anything publicly on this yet, or even, within the company, it's not really addressed. And 9%, interestingly, didn't know. So I'm assuming that perhaps their companies didn't, or they're not talking about it. So, this is the good news. And what we really wanted to look at then is again, this is great, but what's the consequence of that? Are companies saying things and then actually doing something about it and doing it well? Or, is there still work to be done? And that's what we saw next in the data, was the sort of the performance ratings of how employees rated their own employers. So you can see on this slide here that on the left-hand side, you've got a couple of very happy people who said, yes, not only does my company say they're addressing this topic, but they're actually doing it well or very well. So 75% of men said, yeah, they're doing it really well. 61% of women said, yes, my organization, my employer is addressing this topic well or very well. However, there were, as you can see on the right-hand side, a number of people who said, actually, my company says that it is doing something about this, but I don't see it. It's not consistent. It doesn't follow through. So 16% of women said, yeah, they're not doing it well, or they're not doing it well at all. And 4% of men said, no, not doing it well. So again, it shows, the good news is that there's more happier people who are feeling included and seeing that their company is addressing this, but there is still a gap and work to be done.
I got a question from the audience. How is this bias in supply chain compared to other areas in company? Is this bias more a general issue, or is
that's a really good question? And in fact, the one report that I would point you to is a fantastic report that, again, I don't know how many years it's been done for, but McKinsey brings out a report every year which looks more broadly at women in the workplace. In fact, I think it's called Women in the Workplace. And they look at things not just through the lens of supply chain, but from a cross-industry perspective. And in fact, although the female representation numbers aren't exactly the same, they're in the same ballpark. So yeah, this is I guess a broad issue and a topic that companies are addressing. I think maybe supply chain has some sort of unique angles to look at this from, but yeah, in general, it's a common reflection, I think.
Yeah, and we also did some events in the last few years on International Women's Day, and we saw that in high tech, for example, the supply chain participation by women is lower than in the CPG area, for example. So you see.
Yes, and in fact, that's a good point, Martijn. And in fact, that's data that you will find in the Gartner and Awesome report, which is they do look at things from an industry perspective, from what our company's doing, and you can see that retail and CPG in particular are industries that are ahead of the curve on this.
Before we go into the perception in equity, could you explain what is equity and what is the definition of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe semantics to some degree, but when we talk a lot about equality and we talk a lot about equity, and if I can put it in these terms, so diversion and inclusion, diversity, making sure that we have a diverse representation of all different constituents, inclusion, making sure that all those different constituents have a feeling of belonging and engagement. And the equity part is actually providing a level playing field. So not the same for everybody, because everybody, you know, perhaps with different backgrounds, different circumstances, might need different help and support. But where possible, it's about equality of opportunity. That's what I see as equity. I'm sure there's some better definitions of that.
No, that's quite
we could Google. But yes, it's about equality of opportunity and making sure that, you know, if there are constituents that need some additional support to help them step onto a level playing field, you know, that's done.
All right. And how about these perceived differences in equity?
Yeah, and this was actually a really interesting thing that came out of the survey, because we, you know, obviously we did ask men and women to respond to the survey, and we did look at some of the differences in their responses. Is that we asked this question, does your company offer full and equal opportunity to both men and women in relation to a number of things? And we're going to highlight two of those in this presentation today. The others are in the full report. One was, the first one you can see here is on career progression. And there's some quite stark differences, you know, on the left there, 71% of males saw that, yes, they perceive that their companies do offer full and equal opportunity, but women don't agree with that. Only 44% of women said that, yes, my company does offer full and equal opportunity. And likewise, you know, this is something that's in the news a lot, is around, you know, the gender pay gap and equal pay, is that, again, there is a perceived difference. So this might not be real, it might not be reality, but it is perceived reality, that men are more likely to think that there's equal pay for both men and women, and, you know, women do not agree with that. So again, the reality might not match it 100%, but this is the perception, and that's really important when it comes to employee engagement and what that means, and that's what we're going to look at in the next slide.
Yeah. Yep.
So, and you can see here, actually it shows slightly differently on the screen, but what you should see, the numbers have come out rather strangely. So let me just...
it's an 8 on the left.
It's an 8 on the left, and it's a 3.6 on the right.
Yeah.
And what we're looking at here is that disconnect between, you know, if your employer says that, you know, you rate your employer highly around issues of diversity and inclusion and equity, then you are more likely to be an engaged employee. And by that, I mean, you know, you're happier, you are therefore performing well, you're being productive, you know, all the good stuff. So for those people who said, yes, my company's doing really well on diversity and inclusion, they scored their own personal engagement at 8 out of 10. On the other side of the coin, we have a group of people who said, actually, no, my company is not either looking at this at all, or they are looking at it, but they're not doing it very well. My engagement score is much lower at 3.6 out of 10 on average.
You're on mute, or sorry, Beth, I can't hear you. So
can you? No, I'm
getting back again.
Okay, sorry, we must have an internet glitch.
So yes, connected again.
So yes, on the right-hand side, if you perceive your company's not doing well in terms of its approach to diversity,
some engagement of internet.
Engagement. Oh, can you hear me now, Martijn?
Yeah. Yes, you're back again. Yeah.
Good. Great. Hopefully that will stay. It will stay this way.
Yeah.
You are likely to feel disengaged, and, you know, at best, I think that has an impact on, as we've said, on performance and productivity. But it could also trigger a potential job move. You know, if you're not happy in the organization that you're in, then, you know, you may lose people. And also, what we looked at in the survey was, you know, I mentioned at the beginning that, you know, a high number of our respondents were looking to change jobs within the next 1 to 2 years. The second most popular reason to do that was to find alignment in terms of, you know, alignment of personal values with corporate values and purpose. So, you know, that's really important, particularly, I think, well, this might be making a stereotypical comment, but particularly younger people today looking for very much that close alignment between personal values and corporate values. So finding common purpose. So, you know, that's why this is so important to get right.
Yeah, I get a question from the audience. I have a question myself, but from the audience, what women can do to improve level of engagement with the company they work for if the level is not high enough?
Yep, we are going to come to that shortly. That's a great question. So yes, we looked at obstacles, but we're also looking at, okay, so what did people tell us that would be, what would help them, what would cause engagement and, further their careers. So yeah, great question. We'll come to that.
Yeah. My question is to know, how do companies measure the level of engagement? So I hear a lot about executives worrying about the engagement of their employees, their associates, especially with the lockdowns and working out of home. So do you know how they measure the level of engagement?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of obvious ways, or that spring sort of to my mind. Obviously, first is that companies carry out employee engagement surveys, so they actually ask their employees, and there are companies and specialists who go very deep into this as an area of expertise in terms of how do you actually define engagement, how do you measure it and track it. So that's one way. Another very obvious way is perhaps, and again, you might not exactly be able to make clear correlations or causations, but employee turnover. Yeah, that's another one. So there's two. I'm sure there are others, but I think employee engagement surveys is probably the biggest and most impactful way of measuring that.
Yes, but the flip side of this all is you get a lot of social desirable answers. Do people really answered in an honest way?
Well, and that's where it comes to, as I say, there are people who focus on this deeply and are very knowledgeable about how to do those surveys well. Yeah.
So where do we want to see change?
Yeah, and this is where we address the question that came in from the audience just now, and thanks for the question. And, on the next two slides, we'll stick with this one for the moment, but we looked at enablers, so the things that the employees, the supply chain professionals who responded to the survey, we asked them to tell us, okay, what are the things that are working environment related initiatives that you would think to be helpful? And then secondly, what are the professional development initiatives that you would like to see or participate in that would help you? And that's what we're going to look on the next slide. Mm-hmm. But if we look at this slide here, you can see some quite practical things, such as, greater access to flexible working, investment in unconscious bias training, better support for return following long-term leave. That could be maternity leave, but it could also be people having to take leave of absence from illness or having to, again, care for a family member. All these different sort of practical working environment things. The one at the top, which is really actually quite broad, which is a change in cultural values and leadership behaviours. Now, obviously, that's quite broad, very much open to interpretation to what that means. What I take that to mean is that it's about companies taking action from the top down, so that the cultural values are driven from the top, and that action is carried down through the organization. It's done consistently, transparently, authentically, and with senior leaders creating cultures and environments where these kind of issues can be addressed openly, and also that they can model the behavior that's needed to facilitate this.
Yeah, this reminds me of, I have heard a lot of executives, doing speeches, and you often hear, change management is very important. Next slide, please. So, basically, they are not always that practical. And you also mentioned in earlier conversations, executives, they should walk the talk and, give examples of leadership changes.
Yeah, I mean, that example you gave there, Martijn, of change management is a good a comparison, I think, because, they're things that are easy to say, but they're not necessarily easy to do. Simple to say, not easy to do. If you talk about changing cultures, that's a massive proposition. And, there's things that you can do if you think about this metaphor of an iceberg, above the sea level. There are very practical things that you can do. You can put processes in place, you can put policies in place, you can change guidelines, do training. That's kind of really obvious, tangible stuff. But then beneath the sea, the bigger bottom of the iceberg are things that are the harder things to do, like culture, like behavior, like unconscious bias. They're things that you can be worked on, but they're perhaps, a bit more challenging to do.
All right. And the next version.
Sure. So the next one was the second bucket. So the first one was working environment related initiatives. This is professional development initiatives. So again, you can see here sort of a list of things that, again, are quite practical. So the top one, for example, participating in a company leadership development program, better visibility into career paths, access to training, mentoring, coaching, transparency around decisions. So actually, this is kind of the opposite of what we saw right at the beginning, which was all the obstacles. This is kind of like, let's flip those round and try and solve those problems. But I think, of all the things that you can see on the screen here, and what's obvious is that there's no one silver bullet. There's not just one thing that you can do and it'll change everything. It's a mixture of all these things. And in fact, there's one more thing that was on this list, actually just slightly lower down, which was providing access to sometimes they're called employee affinity groups or business resource groups, but they could be, for example, an internal women's network, or, diversity and inclusion focus groups that include males and females, those kind of things that bring people together. Those are also seen as important, and also great ways to provide a networking forum within your own organization.
Did you recognize certain patterns of different approaches, maybe in your whole community, and also based on the results of the survey?
Yeah, actually not in this survey. And in fact, this is something that we're going to share it at the end of, I think, of this section here, is what Gartner's tracking what companies are doing, because you will see some kind of some matches here. Mm-hmm. But what we see from the companies that are represented within the Boom community is that there's quite a wide range of, let's call it, maturity in terms of what companies are doing. So some companies have been doing these kind of things for years and years and years, and they've got quite well developed and mature internal groups. They've got established mentoring programs. They're now looking beyond gender and looking at other underrepresented groups and looking at how they can extend out. And other organizations at the other end of the scale are just starting out. Yeah. So there's a real mix. And again, I don't think there's kind of one playbook that everybody does the same things. Each organization seems to do it in their own way. They have their own cultures and their approaches to things. But definitely, and as we've seen, some companies have targets and some don't. So it's a real mix today. But I think one of the things that we're trying to do, I know Gartner's doing, what we're trying to do as well in the Boom community, is to share those best practices between companies to say, okay, well, this worked for us. Learn from this, or perhaps we did this and it didn't work. You can learn from that too, and just share that, because I think it raises the tide for everybody. Yeah.
So we Supply Chain Media did some surveys about investment in supply chain software, and we also asked for their supply chain maturity. Couldn't it be an idea also to ask the respondents of their level of maturity on a 1 to 5 scale, and then you have a better overview of the answers, and to segment the answer to see, okay, what had the more mature companies have been doing recently?
That's a great suggestion, and I think that's one that I think the Gartner survey tries to tackle, maybe not quite in the words that you phrased, but one of the measures of that is, okay, so how many women do you have at the various levels in your organization? So that's a direct one.
Yeah, but I also that's the one thing of the representation of women on certain levels, but also what you are saying, how long have you been doing this, and to what extent have you already evolved in certain areas beyond diversity, diversity and gender diversity and others?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question.
Another thing, comment from the audience, I think initiatives depend on resource fund availability within the organization. What's your comment on that?
I mean, I guess there are always constraints, but there are things that can be done without necessarily throwing money at it. Things like internal groups, getting together, networking groups or working groups. Yes, training perhaps costs money, but again, it's about opportunity and cost. If we go back to the potential risk of losing employees and the cost of having to hire and onboard new ones, you can use that as a business case potentially to offset the investment in these kind of things. So because we are talking here, yes, all of this is kind of obviously the right thing to do, but there can be a very clear business case for investing in this, both from as I say, a cost. I just mentioned one example of that, but also, there's lots of research on why having a diverse employee base, why that's important from a business outcome perspective as well. And we're not really going to get into the details on that, but there's tons of research out there on that. And be happy to talk about that separately.
Yeah, and there's a lot of talking about scarcity of supply chain professionals, and
absolutely
tap in the pool of supply chain women. You have a new pool to tap into.
Yeah, and I think today it's easy for people to to put their brand out there, to talk about what they're doing in terms of diversity. We see it all over LinkedIn, particularly this week with International Women's Day. We can clearly see the organizations that are making their environments great places to go if you want to work in that kind of culture. So there is a very real need to address this from a talent competition perspective, because as you said, there is a shortage of supply chain talent, and there's a lot of competition for it. So this is part of that puzzle.
Yeah, Supply Chain Media has a LinkedIn group called Supply Chain Women, only for female supply chain professionals. I'm the only male as a founder, but there are a lot of recruiters want to get in to tap in that pool.
Yeah, I can tell you what, I get calls from recruitment companies and also from conference organizers as well, which is great because they want to have more diverse speakers on their panels and, speaking on the keynote stage, which is all great. So yes, there's a lot of demand at the moment.
So, okay, and now you mentioned already the comparison with Gartner. Could you?
And what I wanted to do actually with this last slide, and you'll see here that, so this is a chart from the Gartner report, which you can download from the Awesome Leaders website free of charge.
Yep.
And you'll see here some of the similarity in language. So you can see there, second one down, changing culture, values, leadership, orientation, and behaviors. We saw that in one of the slides shown previously, because what we wanted to do, the question here was, in your opinion, what's the most important thing your organization can do to better progress women into top jobs? So integrated pipeline planning. So that's having a planned approach to developing, promoting, and sponsoring, mentoring employees through the pipeline. There was a clear match between what companies are doing and what employees thought would be helpful for them as well. Where I do see perhaps a little bit of a mismatch is that you saw from the slide previously that a change in cultural values and leadership behaviors scored really highly in terms of what employees are looking for. Mm-hmm. So this number here is what are companies doing, or what do they think they should do? But that's maybe they should focus on that a little bit more. As I say, difficult, easy to say, perhaps a little bit more challenging to do, but that's definitely a little disconnect there.
Okay, we'll talk about it later. So what are your conclusions overall for the first survey?
Well, and these are really high level because we could go into all the details. I think we can spend a lot of time on all of these issues, but it's almost, we started out talking about the obstacles, and we've already seen that, the answers is to kind of flip those obstacles around, turn them on their head. So instead of not having a career path, spend some time actually showing what is the future career path for, particularly, for new joiners, for younger employees. What does their career look like with you? What might that look like as they advance through their career? And then again, visibility and transparency into, okay, I see the path ahead of me. What do I need to demonstrate? What do I need to have experienced? What's the decision criteria that you're applying as you pull people through and along those career paths. And then some of the more working environment practices, so flexibility. We talked a lot in our event on Monday about work-life balance and the having flexible work as we return to sort of back to normal, hopefully following COVID. Will it be normal? No, it's going to be some hybrid between traditional working practices and flexibility threaded within that. And then obviously ongoing, and this is what Choose to Challenge and International Women's Day is about this week, focusing on this issue of, where we can, calling out inequity, doing something about it, trying to eliminate biases as much we can. And I think the foundation to all of that is obviously looking at, this has to be driven from the top. It has to be authentic. It has to be modeled by leaders, and have communicated clearly to employees and also externally too. And my firm belief is that of course diverse, underrepresented groups, women's groups are going to benefit from this, but ultimately everybody wins.
Yeah, right. I think that's the right approach. Next, we're going to discuss what we have developed in previous sessions. I think we had a session in Amsterdam in 2017 and 2018, also with female supply chain directors. And we created a gender diversity triangle. So out of these 2 days in 2017 and 2018, we concluded that there was a triangle involved. So you have on the lower left side the female talent, and you have her manager, her boss, but also the HR department has some responsibilities over here, and we tried to establish certain action points for the 3 parties involved. So it's of course the responsibility of the organization to do something about it, what Beth mentioned, but also the female talent has her role to step up. And personal branding is something she has to do, active networking, and also create a clear career strategy for yourself as a female talent was important. That came out of those sessions. And also the manager, her boss, has some action points. So monitor gender diversity as a whole. That is also related to the company. Amplify women's role. Also, what I read in some academic survey is, as a manager, you should also express and amplify the women's role. So what women have been doing in projects and their contribution to it actively, and also mentorship is mentioned as one thing. On the right hand side, you see also responsibility of the HR department or manager. Beth has also mentioned it. Transparent equality, female talent programs, proactive application, and promotion. So this is the triangle we have created, and we have make it more practical in 3 checklists, and we'll get to that next. But Beth, something to comment on that before we go to the square one, but basically on this slide.
Yeah, I think it'd be great actually to dig into the checklists into a bit more detail. And then, we've got a slight twist because I think this is an evolving model. And we're going to talk about that. Yeah.
So basically, Supply Chain Media has developed and published a lot of checklists on S&OP, on sustainability, and you name it, all kinds of supply chain topics, but also on supply chain gender diversity. And this one was, targeted for the female talent. And we created 10 hard, difficult yes/no questions. So, it's very hard as a female talent to have 10 times yes out of this questionnaire. And that's good. These are all development issues for yourself. So we don't go through all those questions. You can download it for free, ever go to our website, Supply Chain Movement, and you'll find it. But question 8, I want to highlight. Have you written a clear strategy statement for your career? as a female supply chain talent. So Beth, what's your opinion on this?
Yeah, this is an interesting one because, and again, just some extra data from the survey that I thought it might be interesting to share is that we did ask about what were the differences in approach to career planning between men and women. And we asked, do you have a clear idea of where you want to be in 2 to 4 years, in 5 to 10 years, or beyond that? And it was interesting that at least in our survey, that men had a more explicit intention and idea of what they wanted to do within those different time frames. So 48% of men, for example, said, yeah, I have a very clear idea of where I want to be in 2 to 4 years' time, compared to 38% of women. There's only a 10% point difference, I know. But what was interesting is that when we asked, maybe you don't have a plan, you're ready to go with the flow and just kind of see opportunities whenever they come your way without actively going looking for them, women were far more likely to fall into that category. So 33% of respondents said they were happy to go with the flow. And again, there may be nothing wrong with that. But, in terms of, I think, setting yourself up to put yourself in a trajectory, whatever level of steepness that trajectory has, that having an idea, being able to articulate that then means that everything else that you can do on this list, you have a very clear idea why you're doing it and, to what end. And that's one of the things that we actually do spend quite a lot of time on in the Boom community. We have a goals masterclass where women are developing that statement of, what direction do they want to go in? What does that look like?
And to be clear, we curated this checklist, and each individual question is based on an academic survey stating that men are behaving differently than women. And, that's why we have expressed these questions to trigger women to follow up upon these action points. That's basically it. So these are not randomly picked questions. I've read, dozens of academic surveys stating these differences and also approaches between women and men.
And I think, Martin, the only thing I'd add to this is that, of course, it shouldn't be the expectation that every woman, or every man for that matter, is going to be a future chief supply chain officer. No. Not everybody wants to do that. And no, that's impossible as well. Not everybody can do that. But what it is about, and certainly what I hear from the women in the Boom community, is that they just want to be really, regardless of how high they want to go, how senior they want to become, they want to be excellent in what they do and be good at their jobs and be happy in their jobs.
Yeah.
So, it's what you actually do and how it comes out might be different depending on that level of trajectory that you set for yourself.
So so we have also a checklist, 10 questions for the manager, the boss. So we have highlighted the one question: have you ever encouraged a non-confident woman to take a higher position? Could you comment on that, Beth?
Yeah, I think this one's a really important one, actually, and it actually speaks to what we're stealing our own thunder here, Martijn, because I think this is where the role of a manager or even another ally in the organisation to actually give women opportunities and confidence that they might not seek out for themselves. So as we saw from the data that I just shared, there's a relatively large group of women who are kind of go with the flow, will take opportunities as they come along. They won't necessarily seek them out. Sometimes it takes giving somebody, showing somebody, opening a door for them quite explicitly, and showing that, giving them the confidence that they can do it. I got a comment from the audience. The point is that the women shouldn't behave like men. Absolutely right. Yeah, totally right. And that's certainly, hopefully that hasn't come across here, that everybody has to be the same. That definitely shouldn't be the case, and I think that's actually what we're talking about here. The value of diversity is that everybody brings different value to the table in very different ways. And it's about that combination, the sum of the parts, that's where the strength comes from. So absolutely, it's about being authentic. And I hear that a lot. That there is an expectation that women should become like men, and fundamentally disagree with that. And another thing is that more evolved companies are looking at age diversity in project teams, cultural diversity, and also psychological diversity in that sense.
So
Oh yeah, cognitive diversity.
Yeah.
That's a whole other area which is totally fascinating. Fascinating. Yeah.
So to end up, there is also a checklist for the HR manager with some action point. And question number 9 is your talent search completely based on objective big data?
Yeah, Martin, tell me a little bit more about what you mean by big data in this context, just to explain that to the audience.
Looking on all kind of dimensions, not on resumes, but also, do you know what people have been doing in projects, hobbies, so what is the scope of the searches within your company looking for new talents for certain job offerings?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, this is a massive subject, isn't it? And there's a lot of best practice and I guess not so good practice around, how you write job descriptions. Do you exclude people at the very beginning in the words that you use in jobs and job descriptions? When you put a job advert out there, there's so much to this topic. And I think you're right. And you said it already about, it's digging perhaps beyond the CV, not making assumptions about people's abilities or, those kind of things. And, being open and sort of trying to, again, eliminate any biases that might exist. So things like having an interview panel that is representative. Yep. So that you can sort of mitigate some of those biases that sometimes, quite naturally happen because, we're only human.
Yeah, what I also see in the more advanced companies, they are aware that we are going in a new time frame, with new innovations popping up, and we have to think differently, outside of the box. Consumer behavior and customer behavior are changing. So also creative jobs or creative people have new opportunities that they might not have previously.
Yeah, and I think from we talked earlier about the sort of the shortage in the talent pipeline, and we certainly see companies looking, certainly at the sort of the graduate level, looking beyond the traditional supply chain programs at university to find
coming with a background in history of this kind of social studies, moving into supply chain because they understand consumer behavior, and you wouldn't expect it to get these people into supply chain. So next, we created this gender diversity gap analysis. Basically, you fill out the 3 people involved, the checklist, and you score it. We have 4 out of 10 or 5 out of 10 or 3 out of 10, and then basically you can determine what is the gender diversity gap, and it is based on all kind of academic surveys. So you can even measure the gender diversity gap. And the fun part is you can do the checklist yourself as a female talent, but you can also ask the HR manager to do that. But you can also give feedback to the HR manager. Okay, you say you have the 7 out of 10 or 3 out of 10. But in my opinion, it's wrong because you are, that's your perception, but my perception is different. So basically, you can create, a way to address it and even to improve it year over year. So that's what we have discussed earlier in 2017 and 18. And the participant loved it because there are action points, and maybe you can improve 1 action point each year, and then you improve the gender diversity gap. So we have made it practical. So there is an approach. It is based on academic surveys, each question. So, and it's practical and actionable. So you can measure the actual gender diversity gap within your department, within your company, based on this 3 checklists of 10 questions. But then, you came up, is there more? First thing, you have the feedback loop. Now the manager is giving feedback to the female talent, and maybe it's the other way around. But you are, popping up that there should be another dimension, the sponsor or the ally. Beth?
Yeah, I think that this is obviously a topic that has sort of increased in visibility, certainly in the last maybe even just 2 or 3 years, or maybe even less than that, which is this whole concept around allyship. So not just sort of the traditional roles of being a manager or being an HR manager, but actually all of us in our organizations have a role to play in supporting underrepresented groups, be that women or other diverse groups. And we touched on this a little bit before. It could be a broader, more formal sponsorship program, for example, but it could be and again, saying this given the timing of International Women's Day this week, that we call out when we see things that are like, that's not right, have you thought about this, why did you say that, that we actually call these things out. And that's kind of the role of the ally to do that. And I think we all have a role to play in that. Again, it's in an organization, but also outside the walls. How it's how we raise our families, it's how we act as governments, it's how all these everything. So I know it's a kind of a big knotty issue that's going to take some years to address, but everybody has a role to play. So that's why I kind of added this as an extra element, perhaps within this triangle, to make it broader, make it a square, or whatever shape it is.
It is a square right now, but and basically you have also allies, maybe formal allies or informal allies inside your company, but you can also have ally that could be your spouse, your partner, that's outside the company. So you have different kind of allies. But do you mean that you need formal allies or informal allies and sponsors?
Yeah, I think, and actually I think this is probably in one of the checklists. So it's maybe a kind of just leaking and calling it out explicitly. But again, from the data, when we asked, what would be useful for you in terms of helping your career progression, is that things like having a formal sponsor or a champion, being part of a leadership development program, having a formal mentor, these are all things that you might not get today from your manager. Perhaps it's somebody else in the organization that can help raise you or develop you, open doors to opportunities, provide encouragement, all those different things that roles that mentors and champions play. That I think they're really important, and we see more and more companies having these programs in place.
Yeah, I got a question about the gender diversity gap analysis. Are all these questions weighed equally? I said yes to start with, but if you are more evolved, you can differentiate. You create your own version out of it. That's one thing. On this slide, we haven't developed a checklist for the sponsor or the ally yet, but I think we should, because there are some questions about leadership behavior. We have to look for surveys or academic research. How do you express leadership behaviors in the right way? And then make the question yes, no very crisp. Yes, that's a good point. And I think allyship is very important, and I think it has been popping up in the last 2 years after we created the triangle. All right, we have some 3 minutes left, and we have some questions come up. So now we have some questions here, and you already. Oh, sorry. You have some questions, and one of the first question is essentially, I really believe we have to address the bias first and foremost. How do you do that? How do you address the bias?
Well, I think it's probably a combination, and I don't have the exact answer to solve the world's problems here on that. I wish I did, but for me, it's a combination of two things. One is awareness, and then it's about education. So I think all the things that we're doing to have these conversations and bring them out and put them as issues on the table is going to be the first thing that helps. And then the second thing is practical things like, you can do unconscious bias training. There are companies that will come in and, you can have to do training in your companies. But also coupled with that, as I said, role models, leadership role models, actually, having stated objectives and then following through on that with clear, consistent action. That's how you start to change things and start to change bias, by calling it out. That would be my answer. I don't know, Martijn, what do you think?
Yeah. You have to create visibility. Supply chain. We talk about visibility. Make this subject visible, and then you are becoming aware of it for one thing, and then you can address it. And also look outside, look to other companies. And that's what Boom is great environment community for that. Compare. Don't say benchmark, but start discussing with other companies. How is it over there? How is the representation over there? And what are you doing over there? So,
yeah. So, I mean, for example, here's a really easy one. Everybody on this call, email a colleague, email a manager, email your team to say, hey, I just took part in this webinar on gender diversity, and here are my top 3 takeaways from that. Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
That's something you can do right now.
Yeah, right. So we have actually 1 minute, but the good thing is we have a 30 minutes after talk. So after this, we will be in the lounge. So we have 30 minutes also after the hour to discuss it. So you can talk to Beth one-on-one or in a group at a table. So we will go into the lounge, and I will be there, and Beth will be there. And you can talk to each other. So, address someone else in the audience, so one thing. So that's a good way to start with. And to wrap up, on the left, you see, and you will get the link, the checklist for the female talents to be downloaded. And we have the link to Boom, and we'll also make sure that you will have the link to the upcoming survey by Gartner and Awesome. And we'll make sure that also the previous one report will be available, and we'll be, in a follow-up on this. Make sure that we'll make sure that the upcoming survey by Boom will be addressed by Supply Chain Media and accessible for both female and male supply chain professionals. So next week, the next webinar, we have another webinar that will be a supply chain topic about demand shaping and price optimization. But for now, Beth, thanks a lot for joining me and explaining your great survey. So thank you for having me.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
No, you're welcome. And like I said, after this, I will wrap up and we will closing down. Thank you for the audience for all their questions and their interest. If you want to join us in the lounge, we'll be available for the next 30 minutes. If not, thanks again. And maybe I will see you in another webinar or another event. Thanks. And I will wrap up and go to the lounge together with Beth. And maybe I see you there. Thank you and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.